Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is one of the most special, authentic, and relatable superheroes of all time. But does the film stand the test of time? Let's talk about it. Hello everyone, my name is Lewis and welcome to the first part in a 10-episode series where we go through, review, and break down every single Spider-Man film ever made, giving my overall review and thoughts on each one, and today we're going to be reviewing Spider-Man by Sam Raimi. If you are new around here, consider subscribing and enjoy the video. I think the one word that could describe this film in a nutshell is influence. Despite the very simple nature of this film, it had so much complexity, a lot of which people won't give it enough credit for. Most people remember Sam Raimi's Spider-Man as the baseline Spider-Man story. In fact, this film almost has become a de facto for what the origin story of Spider-Man should be. Peter Parker, the death of Uncle Ben, his relationship with Aunt May, Harry, MJ, and the fatherly connection with Norman Osborn, which eventually leads to his downfall, are now all traits associated with an early in his career Spider-Man. Which couldn't actually be further from the truth if you go back and read the original comics. In fact, it was actually nothing like this. For example, Harry and MJ, two of Spider-Man's most classic characters, didn't appear until Peter Parker was in college. But on a baseline, this film became a template for Spider-Man adaptations in general. For example, The Amazing Spider-Man by Mark Webb was influenced so much from Raimi's work that really, when you go back and look at it, it's almost an exact replica of this film. However, despite this film is very complex inherently. Peter Parker's character is handled very well, and despite him not being a direct adaptation from the comics, Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi do a masterful job with his character in this movie. The way that they both craft this character in this movie works perfectly fine for the tone and style of the film. Tobey manages to bring a very subtle, geeky, soft, and gentle performance to the role of Peter Parker, whilst managing to not overdo it in the more aggressive and emotional scenes. This Peter Parker isn't like he was from the comics, but that's what made this version of Spider-Man so interesting and complex in the first place. Not to mention, all of the side characters in this film were handled really well as well, all having complex and interesting backstories. And yes, this does include Mary Jane Watson. Now yes, MJ admittedly is a lot of people's issue with this film, and at one point in time, I did believe so myself. However, I'm actually going to back her corner. I actually made a whole video talking about this subject, so if you want a more in-depth analysis on Mary Jane's character in the Raimi trilogy, you can go and watch that after this video. However, I'm just going to touch on it here really quick, because I feel like MJ is actually a very underrated part of this film. Mary Jane Watson in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is a character that is vastly misunderstood because we see the film from Peter Parker's point of view. However, her constant change in male figures throughout her life is a consequence of her bad relationship that she had with her father growing up, which is clearly made apparent during the first portion of the film. This then attributes to the way that she jumps from relationship to relationship as she goes from Flash Thompson to Harry Osborn, before finally figuring out that Peter was the one that she loved all along. And without talking about Spider-Man 2 or 3 more than I should, this also makes sense as to why she's so annoyed with Peter in the sequels. So imagine this, imagine finally figuring out which person in this world makes you happiest the most, and they've actually been trying to make advances on you this whole time, and then when you finally come round to them and admit your love for them, they reject you. That's gotta hurt. Yes, of course, Peter is Spider-Man, and as the audience, we know that is the reason he can't date Mary Jane, but MJ's anger towards Peter doesn't make her a bad character. In some scenarios, yes, it could make her an unlikable character. As I said, we see this film from Peter's perspective, but that doesn't always mean she's bad. So yes, I like MJ as a character in these films, and I think she is very well written, even though she might not be the most likable at times. And also, not to mention, while we're on the topic of character writing, this film has one of the best Spider-Man villains to date in Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. What a villain this guy is. Willem Dafoe's acting is Oscar-worthy in itself. Norman Osborn is such a compelling character. From his cunningness to succeed to his broken relationship with Harry Osborn, Norman is done justice in this film, and it shows. And in many people's eyes, Norman Osborn in this movie has become a cultural staple in the Green Goblin as a character, and the way that he's perceived in modern day. Linking back to what I said about influence, Norman Osborn in this movie is another pure example of this. In fact, in the recent comic run from Amazing Spider-Man written by Zeb Wells, there's actually a panel in one of the issues which refers to Peter and Norman having an early relationship where Norman acted like a father figure to Peter back before Norman became the Goblin for the first time in the 60s. And obviously, as we know, this never happened. Many fans ended up picking this apart because in the original comics, Peter and Norman, as I mentioned, never had this father and son relationship that Zeb Wells clearly thought that they did. So this was clearly, once again, the influence of the Sam Raimi movie working its way into the mainline comics. And I cannot believe that they let this slip. How did this get through Marvel editorial? I'll have no idea. But it's crazy that Sam Raimi's movie had this much influence over the mainline comics. It's fair to say that this film has had its toll on Spider-Man adaptations in modern day, and it's also clear that it shaped the character for the rest of time. But the one gripe that I do have with this film is that it doesn't stand the test of time. Although Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was good for its time, and as we mentioned, influenced a large portion of films and shows, comics, and even the games to come in a modern generation, it doesn't really stand the test of time. In fact, it's really outdated. The dialogue is choppy and slightly corny at times when superhero films have evolved past that nowadays. The visual effects, especially the computer-generated ones, obviously aren't the best, and some of the side characters like Harry Osborn don't get done justice by actors like James Franco, who clearly wasn't in his element during this movie. However, the film physically isn't just outdated, but philosophically as well. Like I mentioned, this sort of story has become a default baseline for what Spider-Man should be. Uncle Ben dies, he learns great power comes great responsibility, falls in love with Mary Jane, fights his arch nemesis the Green Goblin, and saves the day. I mean, you couldn't get a more predictable and quite frankly boring Spider-Man story if you really tried. For the time, this was great because Spider-Man wasn't in the mainstream, but nowadays I don't think you could fool an audience with a predictable story such as this one. Everyone knows what the outcome of all these different characters and all these different plot lines would be. If you set up a movie with Mary Jane as the love interest, Green Goblin as the villain, and it was an origin story where Peter gets his powers, this is exactly how everyone would expect it to play out. In the modern day, we need something with a little bit more spice for it to really hit. Like, if this film came out in modern day, people would run for the hills with torches and pitchforks about how stupid, dumb, and quite frankly boring this movie is. And people refuse to accept that, but everyone knows it's the truth. In conclusion though, Spider-Man by Sam Raimi is a classic for its era. It's brilliant at what it does, but it will stay stuck in time for the rest of time, while new and fresh, interesting stories take the forefront. Thanks for watching. Here you can watch my video on what villains I would like to see in MCU Spider-Man 4. Like, subscribe, click the join button if you want to support the channel. Thanks to the members, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care, and peace.